Welcome back to more soundtrack rankings, and today we're going to be continuing the Mega Man series on to Mega Man 3. I'm going to quickly go over the future of the series, at least the near future of the series, as it pertains to the direction that it's headed. I asked whether or not you wanted me to continue on with the Mega Man series, or just go on elsewhere after the last one, and I got some of both. There was a bit of a mixed reaction, so I figured the best way to compromise it is to do this. After Mega Man 3 and completing the original trilogy, I'm gonna alternate. So after this, the next soundtrack ranking will be something completely different, and then I'll come back to Mega Man, do Mega Man 4, and then go on to something else, and so on and so forth. And that's the pattern that I'll stick with for the time being. So now on to Mega Man 3. Just like in the previous rankings, this is just strictly going to be the stage themes. So in this case, 8 Robot Master themes and 3 Dr. Wily themes. So 11 altogether. And like the previous rankings, I will preface this by saying this list is just my opinion. Probably will vary day to day. You ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different ranking. And if your opinion is different, great. Feel free to tear my list to shreds, or agree with it, or anything in between. I'd like to hear your takes on this game's soundtrack as well. So without wasting any more time, let's move on to the ranking. At number 11, Needleman. I like the intro to the song, the little bass and drum riff, but after that, I don't know, there's just not a lot going on. It's pretty unmemorable altogether, really, after that, and the fact that the intro, you never hear from it again, doesn't help the cause. You hear it for a few seconds, and then that's it. After that, it's onto the mediocrity that is the song itself. I don't know, it just is quite forgettable, I'd say, in general. It's funny because the groove is pretty cool. It's got like it's a nice little toe-tapping groove to it, but nothing happens really. It just kind of, I could just take it or leave it, Number 10, Hard Man. Like Needleman's, I like the intro riff. It's a neat little riff, and I kind of like the last section too, right before it comes back to the intro. But none of it, including those two sections, are really, anything that I jump out of my seat for either. It's a straightforward, decent little track, but nothing special overall. Number 9, Magnet Man. This was kind of similar to my take on Hard Man, where there are bits that I like. In particular, I like the 3-note pattern in the main verse right after the intro, and the breakdown that transitions right back into it. Something about those notes and the way they sound, and that breakdown transition is really cool too. The way that it goes back around and into the main riff. There's just something about those particular bits that I like, and interestingly enough, they flow right into each other. But everything else in the song is just kind of there, just fairly generic, and it doesn't really pull me in like a magnet would. No pun. That pun was not intended. At number 8, Wily Stages 1 and 2. This one's interesting because it doesn't sound like it doesn't sound like it should be a Wily stage. It sounds like a regular stage, not really like a fortress level. It sounds like you should be able to breeze through the level and not be gearing up for the big fight at the end. But interestingly enough, these Wily stages are really quite easy. In fact, I've always felt like the mid-game stages where you recycle through the Needleman, Gemini Man, Shadow Man, and Spark Man stages and fight the bosses from Mega Man 2, those were far more challenging than the Wily stages, and I know there's a lot I know that has a lot to do with the game being rushed in development toward the end to fit deadlines. And while I'm not positive, I think that fact that these Wily Castle stages felt kind of unfinished was a result of that. So this theme does fit the whole quote-unquote easy levels because of that. But I don't really take that into the ranking all that much. I really just look at the song for what it is, and I do think this is a decent little tune. I like the second half a little bit more than the first, but kind of like the previous songs in this countdown, there's nothing in it in particular that grabs me. It is what it is. It's a fine song, but not gonna be very high in the ranking. At number 7, Shadow Man. Shadow Man's song has a really has a nice rhythm section to it. I like that bass groove a lot, and toward the end, I definitely love that, I don't know, solo, I guess you could call it. That's a really cool segment. It does fit so well on top of the bass riff that is going on there. I've seen people rank this one quite high. I don't know, I don't see it. I think it's a pretty good song that has its moments, but it falls, you know, toward the middle of the pack for me. At number 6, Dr. Wily stages 5 and 6. This is definitely the darkest NES Mega Man theme out there. It almost doesn't even seem like a stage theme. It really could have fit as a cutscene, like during a Dr. Wily conversation, or maybe like in Mega Man 2, right as Dr. Wily transforms into the alien boss, and then maybe even could be the boss theme. It just would have been a perfect backdrop to that confusing situation. But as it is a stage theme. It's just that nobody really hears it, or hears much of it, because the 2 stages that it represents only last about 8 seconds. You're just right there at the end. You grab some weapons maybe, and then you get on with your life. But if you stop and listen to the whole thing, first off, I really like the military march drum patterns at the beginning and the end. And then when it loops back around to start over again, it's a slightly different arrangement. There's a little bit more accompaniment in the second time around. You'd think you'd have a pretty generic song in this spot because of the fact that the levels are so short and nobody's gonna really listen to them. But instead, you end up with probably the darkest song in the series. It's such a cool, creepy tune. I think that there should have been more songs like this in the series. At number 5, Gemini Man. Speaking of dark and moody, Gemini Man does reek of it. It's not nearly as dark as Wily 5 and 6, but there is definitely an ominous tone to it. It has a really neat contrast of choppy percussion with a warm synthesizer sound where the notes just kind of sustain and leave space open for those choppy drum hits. But it really is a contrast of sounds, and I really like when music does that. It kind of lets genres bend the rules of each other and kind of fuse together. It doesn't necessarily have to be a very straightforward, oh, okay, you're a hard rock, so this is how your guitars have to sound. This is how your piano has to sound. I like experimentation, and I think that there had to be some level of it when this song was put together. Even though I just had 2 dark to relatively dark songs mushed together in the ranking, most of the soundtrack isn't like this, so I think it's cool that these songs existed in order to balance it up. I like variety, and I like to hear variety in an album or a soundtrack, and Gemini Man succeeds in providing some of that variety. At number 4, Snake Man. Speaking of variety, and I did not rank these in order to provide transitions like this, but it just happens that here I am talking about variety again. You get a lot of variety in Snake Man's song. First off, you get a variety in mood. The intro is heavy and intense, and then it just abandons ship on that immediately and goes into a more upbeat, optimistic mood for the rest of the song. I like unpredictability like that. I mean, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I at least will always tip my hat to, hey, at least you gave it a try. And in this case, I think it does work, especially since it sets up the table for the variety that I'm about to mention here. Lots of notes, they're all over the place, but they're still melodic. It's not like there's just noodling going on. There's melody there, but nothing repeats. You don't hear the same riff lined up against each other. It just moves on to a new riff. It bends and moves seismographically, kind of like a snake pattern, interestingly enough. It's the most complicated song in the game. I mean, I just play drums and dabble a little bit in other instruments, but so I'm not an expert at all in lead instruments, but I would say that it sounds like this is probably the toughest song to play in the game. You know, don't take that as gospel. I'm not 1000% sure on it, but just based on my ear, I would say that it probably is. The one flaw in it, though, that kind of holds it back is it seems like the whole song is a build-up to something, and it doesn't really have any kind of a payoff. It doesn't build toward anything. It just kind of stops and then re-loops. And it almost sounds like there should have been more where it does end, because that transition that goes back is a little out of place. I don't know, it just sounds off. I don't know, maybe it was kind of like how the intro went into that same main verse with the shift in mood. Maybe that was kind of, they were trying to do the same thing here with the end of the loop, and this time it didn't work. At least in my eyes, it didn't. But like I said, I do like Snake Man's song a lot. I mean, I have it ranked number 4 here, but I feel like there should have been something, some kind of crescendo or some shit at the end. Number 3, Sparkman. Mega Man 3 has a pretty strong production quality with the music, and Sparkman's is a great example of that. It has really good use of layering. The rhythm section is busy and intense. The melody has a steady and satisfying riff going on, but it has such a fat sound to it because everything is layered on top of each other well. Nothing is clashing either. There's just enough room in the few spots where there is space, and it just works. I do think it's a really catchy riff too, and I particularly like the distinction between each of the two sections. There's the main section that has that intense locomotive kind of feel to it, and the second has a bit more of an ominous uncertainty to it. But they both seamlessly flow into each other, and a lot of it I think is because the rhythm section is very consistent all the way across the board. It makes those two very distinct, different sections flow perfectly into each other and provide the song with another dimension to it. You can't accuse Sparkman's song of being plodding and redundant. At number 2, Dr. Wily Stages 3 and 4. This one has the feel of an action movie soundtrack where the hero is going in guns blazing through the fortress and wiping out all the insignificant henchmen before the final fight with the lead villain. It's kind of the yin to the yang, where Wily 5 and 6 is the slower and deliberate, dark piece of music for the final showdown. This one is the opposite, and it makes the stage's themes fit so well because that's essentially where you are in the game. I particularly love the chord progression in the second half of the song. That is one of my favorite sequences in all the Mega Man soundtracks. Especially when the notes come back down low. I don't know, that for some reason that one really does it for me. At number 1, Top Man. This song just plain rocks my balls off. I love how the first section is nothing fancy, just a straightforward, heavy-ass riff. And then the middle section, I really love the sound that warbly lead riff is playing. And then the breakdown is the best breakdown that they've ever done in a Mega Man game. I particularly like the drumming too. It makes the whole thing sound like it's a live band. The song has that feel to it anyway, but I think that the drums, particularly in the breakdown and in that roll, just give this a feeling like it was played live and not processed in any kind of way. So, quick recap on Mega Man 3 soundtrack. Number 11, Needle Man. Number 10, Hard Man. Number 9, Magnet Man. Number 8, Dr. Wily Stages 1 and 2. Number 7, Shadow Man. Number 6, Dr. Wily Stages 5 and 6. Number 5, Gemini Man. Number 4, Snake Man. Number 3, Spark Man. Number 2, Dr. Wily Stages 3 and 4. And number 1, Top Man, taking the top spot. So that'll do it for Mega Man 3. And next time we'll move on to something else outside of the Mega Man world, but we'll be coming back to it and bouncing back and forth to, I don't know, look at that as, I'd say, a fair compromise to both myself and to you guys. So I hope you enjoyed the list, and I'd like to see your own opinions, what songs you liked, what songs you didn't, what you agreed with this list, and what you didn't agree with. All of it is on the table. And that wraps up this edition of Ranking the Soundtrack. See you next time.